everyone, welcome back to Love of the Literary. I realized that I probably should have done this as my first video, but I wanted to get out my TBR for May before April was over, so here we are doing the Booktube Newbie tag. The first question is, why did you start this channel? I started this channel primarily because I am a little bit bored in quarantine and I wanted to have a new hobby, and I've loved watching Booktube for years and just having a bookish community. It seems like a really good group of people who care a lot about reading, and if you can't tell, I love books, I love reading, and I felt like there was a space for me here. What are some fun and unique things you can bring to Booktube? I try very explicitly to read very broadly and read a wide range of authors and genres, including ones that I don't necessarily think I'm going to enjoy, so I think that perspective hopefully will be a little bit unique. I also come from the perspective of being a data scientist, and so I can talk about how I sort of track my reading using data science, and I have a couple other fun ideas planned for how I can sort of integrate my data science experience with my love of books. What are you most excited for about on this new channel? I am most excited for community. It seems like Booktube is a place where there's a lot of smaller booktubers, and I actually really like that. I have no desire to have very many subscribers, and I really would love to interact with people in the comments and talk to people about books, so I'm most excited for the community aspect for sure. Why do you love reading? I love reading because for a couple of reasons. I guess first, it always makes me feel smarter when I read, no matter what I'm reading, even if I'm reading complete quote-unquote trash or books that are not very intellectual. I always come out of a reading experience feeling like I have learned something new, even if that something new is like that I don't enjoy this kind of story or that I do enjoy this kind of story. Second, I feel like it's an activity that is just so enjoyable in and of itself. I'm not reading to finish books, I'm reading because I actually enjoy the reading process. I love that you just get escapism, especially right now. It can feel like we're stuck at home, we don't have a lot of ways that we can get new adventure, and reading is a way that you can still get a window into worlds that you would never actually experience, fictional worlds that don't actually exist, but then also other places and experiences and times that you wouldn't have tried. What book or series got you into reading? I don't think I have that because I've been reading voraciously since I was about 3.5 or 4. I started reading pretty early in life and I just have been reading straight through. As a kid, I loved the Wizard of Oz series. There are 13 of them. No one else knows this except for me, true fans only. And they just get progressively weirder. If anyone doesn't know, the Wizard of Oz is actually an allegory for Gilded Age monetary policy. And then it just kind of goes off the rails. I don't think the later books are actually, I think they're just kids' books, and L. Frank Baum was just like having a great time writing these kids' books. They're very strange. I don't know if I would recommend them now, but they're great. I also loved The Phantom Tollbooth, which I have a copy of behind me, and I think I'm gonna do a reread of pretty soon, actually. I might do like a rereads week where I reread a couple books that I loved as a kid and talk about them. I love this book, both as someone who's half STEM and half humanities in a lot of ways and loves both words and numbers. This book is just such a great read. I also loved the Little House on the Prairie series, and yeah, I think one of the big things that my parents did that really helped me love reading was they didn't make me read chapter books or books that are explicitly designed to teach kids to read. They just said I could read pretty much whatever I wanted. And so I jumped a little bit farther ahead than I maybe would have, and a lot of other kids were reading like the Magic Treehouse books, and that's not to say those books aren't good, but I think that had I been sort of forced to read books that were a little bit below where I wanted to read, even though they would have been maybe in a more appropriate reading level or less challenging, I wouldn't have wanted to do it as much. I also read Sherlock Holmes a lot as a kid, and that was definitely like way above my reading level and was always like a struggle. I often had to look up words the whole time I was reading, but the challenge and the sort of like figuring things out, I love that aspect. What questions would you ask your favorite booktubers? Ooh, I would love to ask the question, what book is a book that you don't think is popular enough on Booktube? Because I think there are a lot of books that are very popular on Booktube, and I think a lot of those books are great, but I think there's also a ton of great books that don't get as much hype on YouTube, and I would love to see what other people think that is. What challenges do you think starting a Booktube channel will be the hardest to overcome? I think the biggest challenge for me will be finding time to edit the videos. Filming is super easy and fun, but I think having the time to edit this into something that I want is definitely a challenge. I'm trying to reduce the barriers to that by doing stuff like filming on my phone, not using an external mic, not trying to rush production quality or have any crazy graphics. But I think that's definitely still a challenge. So, when did you start reading? Oh, I think I already answered this. I started reading when I was, I think, 3.5 to 4. I may have just turned 4. And it was really fast. I'd been wanting to read for a while. My parents were wonderful. My mom is a librarian, and so she obviously was very supportive of books, and they read to me constantly when I was a kid. So I was very like primed to learn to read, and I really wanted to learn to read as a small child, and my parents didn't want to teach me because they didn't want me to be too far ahead of the class in that subject. And so then I think when I was 4, I just like got so frustrated that I taught myself to read over the course of a summer, and have been reading ever since. Yeah, so I learned to read at a very young age. I also read just constantly as a kid, which I think is why I'm a pretty fast reader, in that I was like, pretty much every week on Mondays we would go to the local library and I'd check out like 50 books and just plow through them over the course of the week. Where do you read? I read everywhere. Well, currently I read exclusively in my house, but I usually read right before bed. I try to have at least 40 minutes of reading before bed. I often will read as breaks from work. So I'll do work for an hour and then I'll take a 15-minute break and read a chapter of a book. I will read at lunch, so I'll be eating and reading. Back when I had a commute, a huge amount of my reading was done on my commute because I had a train commute. So I would sit on the train for an hour every day each way, and I would read like a couple books a week just by being on the train. I think I heard Stephen King basically said, like, I'm not a fast reader, but I'm always reading and I always am carrying a book. And I think that especially these days, it can be very easy to instead pick up your phone and be reading internet news, and instead focusing on carrying a book and having that be the thing that you pull out when you're waiting in line. That can get you a lot of reading in. What kind of books do you like to read? I think I already answered this question a little bit as well, but I love to read really widely. I started out as a kid hard in sci-fi fantasy and YA, so I think I will release a video that has my entire YA bookshelf. I'm currently living with my parents in my childhood home, and I have a lot of YA books from my childhood. This bookshelf behind me, I think, is more representative of what I read now. This is my to-read shelf up here, so we have about half fiction and nonfiction, which is very different. As a kid, I pretty much exclusively read fiction. Down here we have some of my favorite books and the books I'm probably going to reread in the next couple months, and those vary from literary fiction all the way through to hardcore sci-fi and fantasy. I've also been really loving getting back into reading middle grade and kids books. I think that they have a lot of really cool stuff for adults to read in them. They're really fast reads. The only kinds of books I don't tend to read a ton of is I don't read a ton of romance. No shade on romance, and maybe I will get into that later on in this series, but I just never was super interested in it. I also don't read a ton of historical fiction because I actually like history books, so I'd actually rather read a history book than a historical fiction, but again, like, if that's your jam, great. I don't actually tend to read all that much science stuff, like pop sci, because I read a lot of science papers for work and for school, and so I don't tend to want to read that as my fun, like, other thing. Although I do read nonfiction that does incorporate some science stuff. All right, I think that is every question on the Booktube Newbie tag. If you have any other questions for me, please leave them in the comments. Again, I am really excited for the community aspect of this, and I'm excited to hear people's feedback on what they would like me to cover. I think my next video will probably be a overview of how I take notes, and then I also have a video on how I've set up a writing desk and a desk tour while I've been in quarantine. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.